Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Today's session is about access to virtual exchanges. We've noticed that over the last year, although actually even before the crisis, we were seeing more and more exchange programs, including a virtual component in learning management systems, online forms, downloadable documents. And the goal of this session, we have some experts here to tell us about how we can continue to make sure that these virtual exchanges are accessible. And so I get the pleasure of introducing the panelists today. So Rebecca Berman is a program officer with American Councils. She's an international development and exchange professional with over 5 years of experience focusing on civil society and inclusive programming for underserved populations, including children and people with disabilities. She has experience with USAID and State Department grants. She also has overseas experience in East and West Africa, Guatemala, and India. The next presenter is Meredith Lopez, a senior program officer with IREX. She's an innovative and strategic thinker with a passion for global development, communications, and philanthropy. She currently manages strategic communications for the Mandela Washington Fellowship of the Young African Leaders Initiative. Jamie Herrera is a digital accessibility engineer. Her background in mobile, web, PDF, and audio-visual accessibility, which includes expertise in WCAG standards for universal design, enables greater inclusion for people with disabilities. She thrives on multilateral and multicultural engagement and social entrepreneurship. Now I'm going to ask Joey Lenny to bring up the slideshow first. Another final note is that you can follow our staff member Ashley is going to be tweeting at the hashtag Joining Hands. You can follow her tweets by going to the Joining Hands website and clicking on Buzz, and you can see the social media there. And we also encourage you to join Ashley in sharing some of your thoughts and reflections from the session. And with that, Becca Berman, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. I'm really excited to be here. And if you can advance to the first slide, please. So as Justin mentioned, my name is Becca Berman, and I work as a program officer with the National Security Language Initiative for Youth Program at American Council for International Education. If you can advance to the next slide. Thank you. And one thing to note throughout the PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to use the acronym MISLY-Y. So if you're using a screen reader, it's NSLI-Y. It's the National Security Language Initiative for Youth Program. And we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview about MISLY-Y first, so you can understand the different components of this program. MISLY-Y is a program of the U.S. Department of State for high school students to learn critical languages and languages that are not often taught in U.S. classrooms. And these include Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Indonesian, Korean, Persian, Russian, and Turkish. And with this program, so my team is the MISLY-Y administration team, and we manage the application process, monitoring and evaluation, and alumni activities. And for this program, we also work with partner organizations who plan and implement the program. And they're the ones who often design the curriculum, work with the teacher, host school sites, and also for the overseas program, they're the ones who work with host families. And these partner organizations include NGOs and universities. And we also have another team at American Council that acts as an implementer of the program. You can go to the next slide, please. So for the MISLY-Y program, the traditional, in air quotes, traditional programs are summer and academic year program. The summer programs are 6 weeks, and the academic year program are 8 to 10 months. These programs are in all of the MISLY-Y languages and for all levels of experience, including complete beginners. Then we have the virtual MISLY-Y program, which we have already done twice, and we are going to do it again this fall, which is a 10-week virtual program for beginner level only. in the languages of Arabic, Chinese, Korean, and Russian. Then we had this summer, we had the NISLY-wide Virtual Summer Intensive Program, which I'm going to say, abbreviation is NISLY-wide VSI. And this was basically our summer program that we usually have that we transitioned online due to COVID. And this was for all NISLY-wide languages, and again, all various levels of experience. And one thing to note about the program implementation is that for the summer and academic year program, and for NISLY-wide BSI, we worked with our partner organizations who implemented the program. For virtual NISLY-wide, my team, NISLY-wide administration, we were the sole implementer. We'll go to the next slide, please. So one of the things I want to talk about before we start talking about virtual programs is what I call, air quotes, pre-virtual programming practices. So these are practices that we do to ensure accessibility and accommodations for our students. And then after I discuss this, I will share more about how we transition these practices and concepts into the virtual space. So the first thing I want to talk about is the accessibility and medical care assessment. And this is a survey that we sent twice, a few years apart, to all of our partner organizations. And we asked them questions about accessibility in medical care, host educational institution, questions about the host educational institution, while questions about local disabled people's organization. Since many of our partners work in several different cities and countries, we had them fill out the same survey for each city that they work in. And accessibility and medical care varies in different cities, even within the same country. One thing I mentioned is that one of the big emphasis we had was on reaching out to local DPOs. DPOs are disabled people organizations. And if you're not familiar with DPOs, the organizations which the primary aim is for empowerment and self-advocacy of people with disability. And these organizations are also led by people with disability. By led, meaning the staff, board, and even volunteers. So the purpose of this assessment is to increase the knowledge of our partners with the local context in relation to disabilities and local perception people might have about people with disabilities or disability and advocacy issues and concern. We wanted to promote a can-do attitude for both our partners as well as our students with disabilities who are studying abroad. We also want our partners to be proactive about accessibility and accommodation rather than waiting for a person with a disability to make the request. So this also, another goal is to be more proactive with planning ahead as well as with knowledge preparation. And we encourage outreach with DPOs because they are often the best resource about tools and opportunities within the local context. So on this PowerPoint is a sample question that we had related to the host city. So we asked, do public transportation options have any of the following accessible features? And the options are lifts or ramps, seat designed with priority seating, handlebars, taxis with lifts or ramps, and then other features which people could fill in the blank. Then if you can actually proceed to the next slide, please. Thank you. And then another question we have is related to DPO. So we asked them what local DPOs are in the city or in the country, and we had them let us know about the DPOs. We also asked what types of services or consulting can the DPO provide for students with disability. So the options we gave were assistive devices, sign language interpreters, certified or qualified per the local context, medical equipment, and resources for find and host families. And so with this in mind, in the future, we would obviously like to do this again because things are always changing in terms of accessibility and accommodation, especially with the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. And so we plan to do this again in the future. And when we do, we would like to include questions about the accessibility of virtual platforms that our partners might be using, tools used, and share with best practices found with accessible technology and online classrooms. So the next thing we talk about is medical evaluation, which we do for our summer and academic year program. And for our program, whenever people apply, we then, about half of them are selected as semi-finalists. And then within the semi-finalist pool, then there's another round in which then some of them are selected as finalists. So if students are selected as a semi-finalist, they fill out this medical evaluation form along with their doctor, which has questions about health and accommodation needs. We make it very clear that the review does not start until after the finalist round, until after students are notified if they've been accepted into the program. First, we do this to comply with the law, obviously, but to also encourage disclosure and open communication, which is important for planning purposes. We do not do the medical evaluation for the virtual program. However, for all programs, in person or virtual, we do ask a question about students to self-report if they have a disability. This question is optional and is for statistic purposes. We make it clear again that this is not a part of the review process. What we do for the virtual Missy Wide is if a student is accepted into the program and they disclose that they have a disability, we then use this information to follow up with them to ask about any accommodation need for them when they participate in the program. Then the next thing we have is the disability accommodation policy, which we share with students once they are accepted into both the overseas and the virtual program. What this policy states is that a participant must submit a written request for accommodation within 7 days of admission into the program. This policy helps us to get information in advance about any accommodation needs so that we may prepare in time for when the program begins. And of course, with this age group, we want students to develop self-advocacy and communication skills, and also so they know they won't be penalized from participation due to disclosure. You can go to the next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about transitioning to the virtual programming. And what was interesting, and I'm more focused on Missy-wide BSI due to the scope of the program, as well as how this was kind of a unique situation because when students were accepted into this program, they originally, COVID hadn't really, wasn't on their radar. And so this was kind of a unique situation as students had applied and then the transition happened afterwards. So one of the things we were thinking about as we transitioned virtually was what do we do with platforms? And what we had our implementing partners do is decide on the platform for asynchronous and synchronous learning, so live or not live learning. And we would then give feedback. For example, sometimes if there were too many platforms being offered, that could be overwhelming for students. But otherwise, we were really flexible about platforms they could use. Just a few examples of ones that were used were Big Blue Button, Google Meet, and Zoom. And just to clarify these platforms, when we switched to Missy-wide BSI, the class sizes were smaller, so different partners had different number of classes per student, and often platforms would vary based on the implementing organization preferences. And then we get feedback. So that's how we did it with the platform. Then one of our concerns with this program is that since students, when they applied, there wasn't the expectation that this would be done online, we did not want a technical requirement to be a barrier for participation. So what we did is we gave students a form that they could fill out on a need-based, if it was a financial need for this, and we could help provide technical requirements. And this included a stipend for internet access, headset, webcam, and tablet. We did have some students ask, and we were surprised that we didn't have as many as we expected. And we think it's because with this age group, a lot of high schools were already providing this due to COVID virtual learning. But this was a really good way to also ensure that the online component isn't a barrier for some of our students to participate. We'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So with Nestle YBSI, I advocate this lessons learned, and so I'm going to kind of share about some of the lessons learned. So one of the things that we discussed was about auditing the process of procuring equipment. We did do some auditing of this, but we would like to do more in the future in terms of the accessibility features of various equipment, as well as what equipment works best with various online learning platforms. We would also like to give more direct guidance and accessibility guidelines for our partners and teachers, such as working with electronic documents, with using platforms, working with developers on these platforms, as well as choosing platforms that are accessible and that would work or not be affected by legal restrictions in some of the host countries. And one thing to clarify with Missy BSI, many of our teachers were teaching the class from the host countries. So we had teachers teaching from Morocco, Taiwan, Korea, all over. So this was also really important about the platform would work in their context too. Then the other thing is we facilitated trainings with teachers about online learning and technology resources, such as using Zoom, best practices with virtual learning. In the future, we might consider doing more pre-recorded ones, especially ones that are related to technical information. One of our lessons learned is that we don't want to let this training on technology take the focus away from training on other topics related to classroom or group dynamic topics, such as microaggressions in the classroom, working with students who have different language levels. We also, in person and for the virtual program, we want to ensure that guest speakers understand the expectations and protocols for inclusion and inclusive technology best practices. One of the things that we did that was really helpful this summer that we plan to incorporate for virtual initially this fall is to do practice sessions with students and teachers before classes begin. So that way when classes start, you can start with the lesson curriculum and not be sidetracked with technology troubleshooting issues. In the future, we would like to also, so during the pre-orientation practice session, in the future, we'd also like to share more information about incorporating best practices with accessibility, especially when in a classroom, often people are sharing documents on the screen, or if teachers or students are working with colored captioning or ASL-interpreted. And so thank you so much for listening, and I will now turn this over to Jamie, who will talk more about the virtual program. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's see, is it showing? Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Herrera, and I am a digital accessibility engineer contracted at Optum, which is part of United Healthcare. Much of the reason for me being in this role started with virtual internships that I had when I was in graduate school. Next slide. So for digital accessibility, what I do, actually, hold on. Yeah, what I do is primarily assess digital content, including websites and apps for accessibility for people with disabilities. Oops. 1 second. Specifically following international regulations for web content accessibility guidelines, or WCAG. I regularly use a variety of assistive technology tools, such as a screen reader, NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver, and TalkBack in mobile, Dragon Naturally Speaking, and also closed captioning to test. It's a very virtual experience. So I work from home remotely all of the time. I enjoyed the virtual experience I had within virtual internships so much that I decided that my career goal would be to work remotely for the lifestyle that I wanted to have and location flexibility for travel. Next slide. So I actually returned to graduate school a few years after working in the workforce because I wanted to return to a college focus of international affairs and combine that with nonprofit work I was doing in education or human rights work. I thought, maybe working internationally with the State Department or maybe United Nations or an international nonprofit such as the one many of you are part of in the audience today But I decided to take a graduate program that was not in the DC or New York area, here in San Diego, California, at the University of California, San Diego. I had to due to family needs. And so I said, well, okay, can I still do an internship with some of the organizations that are primarily located in those spaces? The State Department had a new program at that time called the Virtual Student Foreign Service Program, which is entirely virtual, allowing students from across the United States to participate in internships with consulates, embassies, and State Department subgroups from their home state outside of the DC metro area. And so I applied. And so my first role was with the Office of E-Diplomacy. As an intern, I researched the state of web accessibility, both from a user and administrative perspective across 40 agencies, federal agencies, sorry. I created a challenge in that context to improve the compliance process for those agencies to make digital content more accessible for staff and the public. I also researched emerging technologies in data visualization and mapping for non-visual users. So I had no prior experience with this before entering into this internship. But the exposure to the need and the gaps that I found obviously greatly influenced me to do what I do today. I found it was important to meet regularly with my internship manager and the other students who were also doing this research in order to maintain a sense of contact outside of formal emails that I might have had with other kinds of internships and relationships. In that context, I learned a bit how to utilize things like Skype and Zoom and Google Hangouts. It was also my first experience working with adults and agencies who shared with me that they had hearing or vision loss. It made me aware to communicate on-screen content and learn about auto-captioning software that some people use during live meetings, such as this one. It was also the first time I shared publicly about my own mobility issues. My second grad year program, I was part of a pilot program at the State Department to caption the videos that they release for press releases and embassy videos in English and Spanish. By researching captioning laws and transcribing videos, I learned a skill I keep as a volunteer. This virtual internship also had regular meetings as a group, which was helpful, very helpful. I learned to book virtual meetings as well with other interns, sometimes just for fun. I wanted to intern with the United Nations, and I had the opportunity to do so in a partially virtual and partially in-person internship with the International Disability Alliance as a summer internship in Geneva, Switzerland, working at the United Nations in human rights work with the Convention and Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Becca mentioned earlier. I was also coordinating the production of digital, print, and video material and conducting research and analysis and training materials on international accessibility and mobility issues for over 45 international DPOs, or disabled people's organizations, and also virtually meet in Geneva and New York with the teams from the International Disability Alliance. This gave me exposure to a lot of technical information I had never done before, and also to the variety of needs that people have in order to access content. It prepared me for international team meetings and directly led to the work I do today. Next slide. So we'll talk about this slide a little bit more later, so we can skip this for now. Next slide. Yeah, so lessons learned and takeaways. Virtual internships actually remove the barrier of location. I worked with interns and staff in a variety of states and countries, and I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to do so with a virtual internship. One thing I learned was that relationships do take a lot more work in some ways. So that way it's important for program leaders to regularly check in with their interns or other program participants and provide opportunities in small groups for getting to know other people in less formal meetings, even in live meetings like this one. Having now been steeped in disability awareness in my work, as well as my personal life, I've noted how very few companies actually pursue ability diversity. I also noted that colleagues have often hesitated to disclose disabilities that they may have. And sometimes it's even harder in a virtual setting like this one. I'm hopeful, though, that the increase in virtual meeting spaces allow for self-disclosure, adaptation, and flexibility in where people do work and how they do work. So thank you so much. And yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Jamie and Becca. As Justin said, my name is Meredith Lopez, and I am a senior program officer with IREX. In my role, I manage strategic communications, brand management, our fellowship, the website for the fellowships that I work on, as well as our social media. IREX is an international nonprofit organization that strives to build a more just, prosperous, and inclusive world by empowering youth, cultivating leaders, strengthening institutions, and extending access to quality education and information across the world. Been with IREX for nearly 7 years, and my primary role is working on the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. Next slide, please. So the Mandela Washington Fellowship is the flagship program of the Department of State's Young African Leaders Initiative, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary this month. The fellowship brings young leaders to the United States for academic coursework and leadership training, and it creates unique opportunities for fellows and Americans to collaborate as they spur economic growth and prosperity, strengthen democratic governance, and enhance peace and security across Africa and the United States. It is open to 25 to 35-year-olds in all 49 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And since the fellowship started back in 2014, we have had nearly 4,400 alumni from all 49 countries participate in the fellowship. Inclusivity of all types is a high priority for the fellowship, and since the program began, we have had about 5% of our total participants, both in terms of our alumni and selected candidates for the 2021 fellowship, who self-identify as having a disability, so about 250 of our alumni. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, having run the fellowship for a number of years, we have a lot of experience working and collaborating with our fellows who have different types of abilities and accessibility needs. But this year, with the advent of COVID, things were a little bit different. We had in March, when we normally choose our finalists and alternates for the in-person program that happens in the United States every summer, that happened around the time when everything was starting to shut down or be postponed. And so we transitioned from doing our typical in-person program, which would have had 700 fellows from all 49 countries of sub-Saharan Africa attend leadership institutes at 27 educational institutions, a summit in Washington, D.C., and a subset of the fellows participating in professional development experiences. We transitioned from that intensive in-person program to a solely virtual program this year, with plans to postpone the typical fellowship until next summer. So we went, so this year, rather than trying to adapt our program and replicate it in a virtual manner, we decided to do something different and kind of reinvent things that would be relevant for both our fellowship alumni and the candidates who were selected for the program that was postponed until next year. So we had previously had some plans in the works for a virtual platform. We have a website for our fellowship, and we were transitioning to some different platforms for courses and things like that, but we had to pretty dramatically scale that up in terms of our timeline as well as the capacity. So what we ended up doing was in mid-July, we launched a new portal on our fellowship website. We are partnering with 12 different educational institutions, a subset of those who typically deliver our leadership institutes, to launch courses and other types of resources between mid-July and early December. So we're launching something new every 2 weeks, and it's a pretty intensive process, as you can imagine. Additionally, beyond the courses that we are launching, we have a collaboration platform for all of our participants and stakeholders to continue to find one another based on common interests and needs. Next slide, please. So this year, when we reinvented our program, essentially, we had to completely rethink our approach to disability accommodations. For our in-person programs, participants are primarily attending in-person activities. There's not a lot of other like written materials and things like that. It's fellows are going to lectures, community service events, site visits, things that are primarily happening person on campus and in the communities in which they're living in the United States. We utilize different types of individual questionnaires and work with our fellows on the different types of accommodations that they need in order to be able to participate in the program as fully as possible. With the transition to virtual programs, we had to completely rethink that. As I mentioned, we have a pretty large alumni group, 4,400, and with our selected candidates for next year, we realized we were going to be creating content for potentially up to more than 5,000 people. And so we had to think a little bit differently about how to make it all accessible. We decided to take a more broad strokes approach and really try and proactively develop the content so that it would meet a wide variety of accessibility needs from the get-go, and anyone who was trying to access it would be able to do so. Next slide, please. In addition to the potential barriers for our fellows and alumni with disabilities, we also had another layer of accessibility concerns to contend with, and that is low bandwidth internet. As I mentioned, our participants come from all over sub-Saharan Africa, and so we already have to take bandwidth into consideration for our website, our program application, and things like that. But with the launch of new virtual courses and other platforms, we had to be doubly certain that the barrier that low bandwidth internet can erect would not be problematic for us. So we've done a few different things to try and address this and plan accordingly. First, we have a group of about 60 alumni from across the continent who are part of our alumni ambassadors group. And they have been helping us by reviewing content as it's being developed, providing feedback, and helping to drum up interest among the rest of the alumni. It's been really helpful for us to do feedback sessions with them because we have been able to adapt and adjust things as we go, ensuring that certain types of accommodations and things like that are being made so that they're all able to access it. Additionally, it's really important when you're working with folks in a low bandwidth environment to keep in mind both desktop and mobile accessibility. Most of our users access the internet from their mobile device. And so while in the US, we work with partners who use both desktop and mobile internet. A lot of our users are really just accessing things from their smartphones. So we are working with, our website is adaptable to be easily used on a website, but we're also using other platforms that have apps available. Additionally, we have really prioritized asynchronous content because it's much easier for our users to access it on their own timeline when they might have internet access. We've also tried to ensure that we're making the lowest file size possible documents available, whether that's a video or a PDF or some other type of documents so that it's not too difficult for them to download over a 3G connection or excuse me, over dial-up internet. Lastly, we found that it's really important to create both closed captions, which I know we all are used to using for videos, but also creating transcripts. If someone doesn't have internet strong enough to stream or download a video, they won't be able to access the captions, thus making it difficult for them to access that content at all. So we proactively create transcripts for every video so that anyone who needs to can download them and access the content without having to watch it. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the best practices that Jamie and Becca and I have found when making content adaptable. I will kind of go through some of these and then I give Jamie and Becca the opportunity to add some additional points as well. So when you're creating written documents and presentations, it's important to utilize different types of accessibility features that are built into different types of programs. Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Adobe, a lot of them have features that are now standard parts of their program. So, learn how to use them. For example, style headings in Word make it easier for documents to be accessed by a screen reader. And you can easily create a template for your staff and partners to use that takes those types of things into account. We spent a lot of time trying to train our team up on using those different types of features so that it's not just a small group of folks who know how to make things adaptable. Additionally, we always encourage folks to write effective hyperlink text. Don't use phrases like click here. Those are much less helpful than action-oriented phrases like download this document, and that's easier to access with a screen reader. Also encourage you to think about adapting composite graphics. Sometimes, one of the challenges of the content that I have been working with for our virtual courses is that it covers a really wide range of topics. We have our university partners producing everything from content on how GIS is being used to track the current public health crisis to addressing food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa. And sometimes the different types of graphics that they're providing are not the most accessible. And so we've had to get creative and figure out different ways to sometimes adapt those so that someone can zoom in without the entire thing pixelating and becoming unviewable, and sometimes recreating text that's alongside a graphic so that it's easier for a screen reader to read. I encourage you to think critically about the types of things that are being included on slides so that you can address them as comes up, because not some content is really easy to adapt and others is a little more challenging, so you've got to be creative. Additionally, it's important to write effective alt text. Don't just describe an object, also talk about its purpose. There might be, depending on how an object is being used, you may describe it differently in different contexts. For example, we, in some of our PowerPoints where we have branding, it's important to talk about the different logos and things like that that are on those and what they look like. But when they're being used just as like a visual branding thing on an interior slide, that it might be more appropriate to mark something as decorative, because it's not essential that a screen reader read it every single time it comes up. So just think critically about how content is being used and adapt things as you go. Lastly, I think it's really important to ensure that there is a process in place for document review, so you have a core team that understands all of the different possible needs that folks may have, and is able to go through things with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that it is all as accessible as possible. Jamie and Becca, is there anything else you want to add?
You covered everything I would have said on the slide.
Next slide, please. Sorry, Becca.
One thing I would just say is that, things are always updated with like software and program. So it's always good in Meredith, you mentioned the review process. It's always just make sure that it's ongoing, you know, because if there's a new version of Microsoft Word, it might change some of the accessibility content and so forth. So it's important to make sure it's ongoing.
That's a really good point, Becca. I know that another example, we use the platform Canvas for our course content online, and they just introduced a bunch of new features that they're rolling out to accounts on a rolling basis, and some of those have even improved their already pretty great accessibility checkers and things that are built in. So definitely try and stay abreast of the different technology changes, because I think that with recent releases of a lot of software, things are getting easier. So in terms of videos, a few tips that I have are to make sure that you get any notes from your presenters when after a video has been filmed. It's really important to ensure that, like, if they're talking about something that's very technical, or they're talking about different individuals, that you're spelling those terms and names correctly in captions and transcripts, so you're making sure that people understand what's being discussed. In terms of captioning, you can, there are a lot of different ways to do this. You can do captioning by hand, but you can also use YouTube auto captioning as a starting point, and then review and edit from there, depending on the length of the content that you're working with. There are different ways to do things. Additionally, as I mentioned before, it's really important to create transcripts in addition to captions. You can download captions from YouTube and convert them to words so that they can be accessed regardless of whether or not someone's able to stream a video. Additionally, we found that it's really important to make videos accessible in multiple formats. YouTube embeds are great, but if someone's not able to stream a video and is able to download it, then you'll definitely want to make an MP4 downloadable so that they can watch a local copy. Lastly, similar to written documents, make sure that there is a process in place to review videos so that captioning is correct and that you're taking other things into account.
Yeah. Becca, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
No, okay. Actually, I think maybe one thing to add with the caption is I've noticed sometimes that people will sort of default to auto captions, or people will do it without the punctuation mark, and that makes it really hard to read. So one thing I've really started to encourage people to do is try to do earplugs, or to pretend that you're totally just focus on the words themselves. And then that's a good litmus test. Like, would you still be able to understand it without the audio?
Yeah. The other thing also, someone had asked in the chat, I can answer that now, as far as recommendations for closed captioning software. I know that some organizations and companies can, might have the budget for software that costs money. There's quite a few captioning types of software, some of which have a free component for a time period, and others that are free all the time. So I think YouTube is a good start for a lot of what people are looking for as a starting point to caption things, meaning that there's this secondary review that Meredith mentioned. Also, we have another slide of resources, but I would recommend also looking at Amara, AMARA.org. They have both free and paid options, but they also have a volunteer section for people who caption and transcribe, such as myself, for people when wanting to help others in whatever needs they have for video. Subtitle Edit also is one that it's a closed captioning software that I have not yet tried, but some of my peers in the captioning space do use that. So those are three to start with. All right, so I've given that this is a discussion about virtual experiences, and a lot of that is video, like what we're doing now. I wanted to sort of include this slide, or the three of us wanted to. We wanted to mention that in terms of having live meetings, it's important to be adaptable and flexible and patient, knowing that not only are there technical challenges, someone's video might freeze, for example, or other things happen that are not intended, but also the accessibility pieces that are either temporary or permanent disabilities. I guess I could mention that here. So like temporary and permanent access issues happen all the time with virtual meetings. As a user with access limitations, either temporarily, like calling in without video bandwidth and only having the sound, or hearing loss, like being in a loud area, or actual permanent hearing loss. Sharing that in a virtual meeting context will be helpful to disclose so that presenters and speakers don't assume everyone can view the screen or has heard all of the information. The other thing to consider is that there are quite a variety of video platforms. We've mentioned quite a few in this discussion. None of them are entirely accessible 100% for presenters. And so it's important to communicate with presenters as they work with whatever that means for you, particularly for presenters that rely on screen reader and keyboard navigation. As a rule, I always ask if users may need accommodation, whether it's the presenter or the audience member. And as Meredith had mentioned, provide shared content ahead of time. The other important thing is to pause and try to slow down. I know that can be hard. And to not dominate in the conversation. I know for myself, it's a challenge to sometimes stop and ask what questions people have, but that's a skill to learn and very worth having. Also, as mentioned earlier, describing what's on the screen is important if that is important. So in the same way that it's important to understand if an image is decorative or meaningful, it's important for the presenter themselves to not necessarily read everything on a screen, but if you expect the user to have that information, don't just say, look at the screen, you know. And consider live captioning. I didn't realize actually until a month ago that you can assign someone to do live captioning in Zoom, for example, as well as in MS Teams and Skype and a couple others. So that's something to mention. I didn't put this on the slide, but in terms of virtual teams across countries or even within the same country, you know, not everyone may speak the same language as their first language. So speaking slowly and considering captioning is helpful also for multilingual users, in addition to those that may need to mute their meetings, such as if they have kids in the background. One thing I can't emphasize enough is to advocate for greater ability diversity at your workplace and for users that are using your products and programs. Many companies overlook diversity when it comes to disability, and so they don't naturally default to inclusive meeting practices. So what other things do we want to add on this?
The only other thing I would add is I know that some platforms like Teams and Skype have like hand raising ability within the meetings, and that can be really useful to call on people, or if folks feel folks aren't able to interject because of of an ability difference, or feel uncomfortable jumping in that can be a good way to ensure that you're passing the mic around, so to speak.
Well, I think kind of the other thing about the mic, the hand raising thing, I know when Jamie and Meredith and I spoke before, I was saying that sometimes as a deaf person, it's hard to know when to interrupt, even in live spaces, because there's sort of like, people have the cues of the pauses or the, like the comment people make. So that's another benefit, in terms of not just for everybody in ways that you don't realize. It kind of goes to the idea of like universal design. It benefits everybody.
You also mentioned, Becca, in our discussions, even as a trio, as we prepared for this meeting, that not having video for everyone is sometimes more helpful, depending on the platform. You mentioned, the ability to view the interpreter, as we're seeing now, is sometimes not adjustable.
Yeah,
So,
I think we touched it. And I think it's always good to ask, the people, the deaf person, or even anybody really, how they want to do it. Because on one hand, yes, it's better to have video off because then you see the interpreter. On the other hand, sometimes it's worse because I really like to see the audience and their face expression. One thing I really wish that Zoom would do is, I wish they would do it so that you could pin two people, so that there's always the interpreter plus the speaker. But hopefully that will be a future upgrade with Zoom,
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. So we've put a few additional resources here that could be helpful for you as audience members in this venture into the virtual exchange space, or even just as you yourself do live meetings with other people and prepare accessible content. So those are available for your usage. And if you have any further comments or questions, let us know. Meredith, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add about the resources you provided, since I was going to provide very similar resources. So I feel like you've got a lot of that covered too.
I mean, I think the main thing that I would say is that there are a lot of great resources out there these days. Like we were saying before, there are a lot of features built into software these days, makes this easier. So it's good to learn how to use those, but there are also resources that different universities, like this University of Washington guide that I included, that really delve deeper. As Jamie said, there are a lot of different types of services and things like that out there as well. So if you're looking at doing synchronous events or mostly asynchronous content, definitely think about the content that you are using or trying to create, and do research on what platforms and software seem most appropriate for your needs. Each one of them is a little bit different, but there are a lot that cover the same types of things.
And a lot of the practices that we've mentioned here, I know we are talking about inclusive virtual exchanges, but as someone who works in this full-time, I recommend for anyone on this call and anyone in this conference, it's accessibility is not just about the program users, but about your staff as well, and people who might be consuming content online who may not actually know your work yet, but having accessible content will not only be available for people searching for your work, but even for search engine optimization. Yeah, so you can put the next slide on as we move into questions and answers.
Thank you, everybody. This was a great presentation. Actually, I learned a lot, and I think it's definitely, I feel like we're kind of lucky now that we can be in a world where you can expect accessibility to improve and not get worse. I think I've seen both sides of the coin. Monica has mentioned to me that we have a few questions in the Q&A box, and so I wanted to pass it on to Monica so we could go through some of those questions. I've also got some questions of my own, but I'd like to see the audience get their questions answered first. So go ahead and take it away, Monica.
Great, thanks, Justin, and thank you to all the panelists. That was very, very informative. So to start, one question was, I was wondering what internships and fellowships that you provide to international students, specifically visually impaired students. I believe maybe Becca, if you want to talk about the programs at American Councils for International Participants first, and then Meredith, maybe you can take it from there.
Sure. To clarify, so the question about internship for students?
International students.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, with American Council, I mean, obviously we always want to have diversity of applicants for staff and participants. So definitely, if you're concerned about that, don't let that stop you from applying for jobs or opportunities. I know with American Council, we have offices overseas and based in the US. So if you go to the website, americancouncils.org, and I can type it after I'm finished talking, you can find information about internships and job opportunities. And I'll just do a little PSA alert that we'll be opening up applications for the NISLY-wide program at the end of this month. So definitely check out the website, which is on the PDF, and I'll write it as well. And
Great.
At IREX, we run a pretty wide variety of exchange programs covering a pretty wide variety of age ranges. We work with teachers who are working with students either in classrooms overseas or classrooms in the United States. We have exchange programs for college students, particularly undergrads from Pakistan and a few other countries in the region, as well as professional level exchanges like the Mandela Washington Fellowship, the Young Leaders of the Americas Initiative, and the Community Solutions Program. So I would encourage you to go to IREX.org. There's information, particularly in our leadership and education practice areas, about all of those different types of programs. Like American Councils, we really prioritize inclusivity on the Mandela Washington Fellowship, as well as our other programs. Anyone who's interested in the in applying for the Mandela Washington Fellowship, we provide upfront information about the types of accommodations that folks can expect, with the caveat that each participants' needs are approached individually, just so that people can get an idea of the the type of things that may be available, because services that are available in the United States may be different than those in their home countries. And so we do that so that people understand that we are happy to make any accommodations really that are necessary, and we're willing to work with folks on what their needs are to make sure that they can participate as fully in a program as possible.
Yeah, and as I'd mentioned, my experiences were as a student domestically in the United States. So I wouldn't be able to confirm whether the virtual student foreign service program is available for international students at this time, but the link is available in the slide deck for VSFS, Virtual Student Foreign Service, .state.gov. Also, the International Disability Alliance by nature is an alliance of a lot of organizations that work to further disability rights internationally, and themselves are international. So I would recommend to go to that website as well, internationaldisabilityalliance.org or com, I forget. And I wouldn't be able to speak for Optum directly, but I do know that they have student internships as well as post-college internships. Optum, as a healthcare provider, healthcare insurance provider, has an international presence. So you can look on unitedhealthcare.com or optum.com.
Great. Thank you, three. And I know there's quite a few questions coming in about the slides and the resource page. So my colleague Ashley Holden put in the chat box the direct link to these slides for the session. So you can make sure to access those, and they will also be on our webpage. And another question, Jamie, this is for you. It says, I am the Director of Programs at AFS Intercultural Programs. It is key for us to deprive this cohort of teens of a meaningful intercultural exchange. We have developed a virtual exchange and would like to know how we can have it evaluated for its accessibility. Do you have resources you can name? Jamie, you're on mute. If you can.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. There's a lot of companies that specialize in accessibility assessments and reviews, not just of websites and mobile apps or digital content in general, but maybe that specific type of program consideration. I think highly of, there's three that come to mind that are kind of the big players in this field. One of them is called Level Access. The other is TPG. It's the Paciello group, and I'll spell that in the chat. Paciello, the Paciello group. And also DQ, which is DEQUE. DQ also has a lot of resources available for people to incorporate into their own learning to make content accessible through a program called DQ University. Yeah, so those are the three I would start with. There's a lot of companies of varied quality. Yeah, and so any other questions you might have, feel free to contact me.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, and if you don't mind typing those in the chat box to share with the attendees. And Justin, I know we only have a few minutes left. Do you want to share your questions and then do wrap up?
Yes, sure. I can go over some questions here. I think one of my main questions was how do you all think about PDF use? I think Meredith mentioned a number of tools are like Microsoft Word and PowerPoint have accessibility features, Adobe also. And usually when you create documents, you can create them in a variety of different formats. And so I was kind of curious how on Nestle Y and the Washington Fellowship, how those programs think about using PDF versus other document formats. And,
I can speak a little bit to the Mandela Washington Fellowship. We do use PDFs, but we are pretty diligent about checking to ensure that when you're converting documents that the accessibility features aren't lost. So I think that that really needs to be part of like an overall like review process when you're doing document conversion, things like that. Jamie, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the head in terms of most content that people make starts somewhere else before it becomes a PDF. And so the built-in, there's also Microsoft Word has an accessibility checker that is really helpful to prevent accessibility issues from occurring within the PDF that it might be converted to. Google Docs also has some of that as well. And so there are other document tools that people might use to convert to PDF. But the resources that that Meredith you had provided from Adobe and Adobe Acrobat do have a lot of information available for people as they're on that journey. I think the key thing here is to begin accessible, begin the process with accessibility in mind. That's like my mantra for life, since I always say that at least once a week to some context that I'm in, some context. Yeah, so otherwise, if you don't have that and you still have to have all these PDFs that might be needing to become accessible, I think Adobe's PDF information does provide some good starting points for remediation, fixing the some of the main issues there.
And to piggyback off of what Jamie said, I think it's, and touch back on something that we talked about earlier, it's really important to have your entire team trained on these types of things, particularly when you're creating a high volume of virtual content. And I know for us, you know, we've launched 7 courses since the beginning, or since the middle of July, which had, you know, 125 videos and like dozens and dozens of documents. And I obviously couldn't do that all myself. So there's a lot of training that had to happen so that the rest of our team could at least, you know all the basics for what they needed to do in order to make documents, videos, and other things accessible. So try, you know, do what you can to learn about all of the different options that are out there, and then be sure to share those resources with other folks as well, so that you're starting with a larger knowledge base. This is a really good learning opportunity for people, and it's a really important skill to develop in today's day and age.
Yeah, again, those of you on this call, you may need to be that advocate. Even if you yourself have never experienced an accessible PDF or know what that means at this point, consider yourself empowered to do that. Go. No.
Great, thanks, thank you. And I guess just kind of, if we've got a couple more minutes left. And I think I heard Becca and Jamie, Meredith might have mentioned it too, that certain Zoom or certain webinar platforms aren't permitted, aren't available in other countries. And so like different partners tend to prefer different platforms for synchronous class materials. And that reminds me of a presentation I did a couple years back with a colleague in Saudi Arabia, and we at the time were not able to use Zoom because it was not available in Saudi Arabia, and so we had to use GoToMeeting, which unfortunately is not quite as accessible as Zoom. I was kind of curious what platforms do you guys find that on your programs that you most jump between, if not Zoom, in the situations where it's not available in other countries?
We predominantly, I find, use Zoom and or Teams for our meetings. One of the things that I think that Teams is auto closed captioning is a little bit better, or at least in practice it seems to be a bit better than the one built into Zoom. But really, I mean, you know, we're working with folks in such a wide range of countries that whenever I need to do some kind of meeting with one of our fellows, I try and find out like what they can access first, and then kind of go from there.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you find a lot of people using WhatsApp? Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, people do use WhatsApp a lot as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Becca?
This is Becca. So I'm actually going to ask my coworker, Sarah Hansen, to jump in and answer that question because she does a lot with the technology for my program. Sarah, can you turn your video on? And I'll turn myself. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you all today. Yes, so I work on the virtual Nestle-wide program as well as pitching in for the virtual summer intensive program that we did due to COVID. And we predominantly use Zoom for Business. And I think, you know, I know a lot less about accessibility requirements than many of the people on this call. But what I've been learning is that the different types of Zoom subscriptions really afford you a lot of different types of features. So one thing that I would just suggest, we obviously for the summer programs allowed people to choose from among any number of platforms for live classes, but I would suggest really trying to dig in and seeing if you can get a meeting with someone at Zoom before you start down a path with a paid subscription, because it can be quite different than a free subscription, of course, also different from sort of middle of the road subscription based on whether you're using Zoom Pro or for business. So just things to think about, and I'm definitely still learning, but thank you all so much. This is really, really good content, and I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you. Are there
I'll
any,
also kind of throw out the, not that it's necessarily a lot better, but in the company context, WebEx is actually widely used as well. I know it hasn't quite been mentioned yet here. There's not really any platform that's 100% accessible for all users yet. However, I see updates happening on many platforms just in the last few months. I wonder why. So I anticipate that there will be improvements based on user requests for a number of platforms, many of which I may not have interacted with yet, but especially in the international context where other platforms are much more widely used than the ones we mentioned, but maybe the US, we don't use those. As mentioned, it's good to ask what the participant is using or what they would like to use for their needs.
Great point. Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. That was an amazing presentation. You all gave so many excellent tips for how to make virtual exchange programs more accessible. And I think audience members can see a lot of these tips are things that we've been talking about over the years related to accessible documents, websites, and this is our chance, guys. We can now finally reach the accessibility zenith. So, and with that, I want to share also before we sign off that at 3 p.m. Eastern time, we have a movie showing, and we hope that you will attend. And the title of the film is called Opening Doors to College. And it is a documentary about students with intellectual disabilities and going to this new range of college programs that's been emerging in the last 10 years in response to federal funding. You can actually learn more about these programs through Think College. The documentary is this documentary is the same director as the movie Intelligent Lives, if you've seen that. So we think it's going to be a great chance for exchange professionals and individuals to learn about the Think College affiliated post-secondary transition programs on your campus, and hopefully it'll get you to start thinking about the ways that you can reach out to your local post-secondary transition program and start to think about ways to collaborate with them and to design some exchange programs so that we can start involving more students with intellectual disabilities in the amazing international exchange world that we've all come to know and love. And with that, we're going to say goodbye, and hope we'll see you at 3 p.m. Eastern, and have a great rest of your day.